Welcome to Legends at Midnight, where ancient myths come alive. Tonight's tale is Origins and the Primordial Deities, Chaos, Gaia, Ouranos, the birth of Titans. If you've already subscribed and left a like, let's begin. In the beginning, before time itself took form, before the stars adorned the heavens, before mountains rose from the earth and oceans filled the deep valleys, there was only emptiness. A vast, limitless void that stretched beyond comprehension, beyond imagination. This was chaos, not disorder as we understand it today, but rather the absence of all things, a gaping abyss of nothingness that contained within it the potential for everything that would ever exist. Close your eyes and imagine this primordial state. There is no light, no darkness, for these concepts had not yet been born. There is no sound, for there exists nothing to create vibration, nothing to perceive it. There is no sensation of warmth or cold, for temperature had no meaning in this timeless expanse. Chaos was the first, the beginning, the source from which all would eventually emerge. And yet, within this formless void, something stirred. A presence, a consciousness, an entity beyond definition began to take shape. This was not creation as we understand it, with hands molding clay or words spoken into the ether. It was more like a dream slowly gaining clarity, a thought forming in the mind of the universe itself. From chaos came the first beings, not created through birth as we understand it, but rather manifesting as fundamental aspects of existence itself. The first to emerge was Gaia, the Earth Mother, the foundation upon which all life would eventually flourish. Alongside her came Tartarus, the great pit, the deepest region of the world. And then arose Eros, the primordial force of attraction, of coming together, of creation through union. With Eros came the potential for generation, for multiplication, for the endless cycle of life that would eventually populate the cosmos. Darkness and night had not yet been separated from light and day, so next emerged two more primordial deities. Erebus, the embodiment of darkness, and Nyx, the goddess of night. These were not places or times as we understand them now, but rather states of being, fundamental aspects of existence that would later become the concepts we recognize. Gaia, unlike the void of chaos, possessed form and substance. She was the solid ground, the nurturing earth, the foundation upon which all would stand. Imagine her as a vast, sleeping being, her body forming the mountains and valleys, her breath becoming the gentle breezes that would one day caress the world. Her skin was the soil from which life would spring, her veins the rivers that would nourish it. She was not yet adorned with forests or meadows, not yet teeming with creatures of all kinds, but within her lay the potential for boundless creation. As Gaia took form, she brought forth from herself Ouranos, the starry heavens. He emerged as a great dome stretching over Gaia, embracing her, covering her completely with his vastness. Ouranos was filled with light, scattered with brilliant points that would become the stars. He was the boundary of the upper world, the limit of the sky, the container that held all within its expansive reach. Imagine these two primordial beings, Gaia below, solid and nurturing, Ouranos above, vast and illuminated. They existed in perfect union, the sky embracing the earth in an eternal cosmic embrace. From their union would come the next generation of divine beings, creatures of immense power who would shape the world to come. But before we speak of their children, let us ponder the nature of these first deities. They were not gods as later generations would conceive them, with human forms and human passions. They were more fundamental, more elemental. They were the basic building blocks of existence itself. Gaia was not merely a goddess who represented the earth. She was the earth. Ouranos was not simply a deity associated with the sky. He was the sky itself. Their consciousness, their being, was spread throughout their vast forms. In the soft silence that followed the emergence of these first beings, the universe held its breath. The stage was set for the great drama of creation to unfold. The primordial forces had taken shape, and from them would come all the wonders and terrors of existence. as night followed day in endless cycles. Though day and night as we know them had not yet been established, Gaia and Ouranos came together. Their union was productive beyond measure. First came the Titans, 12 immense beings of incredible power. 6 males: Oceanus, Ceus, Crius, Hyperion, Iapetus, and the youngest, Kronos. 6 females: Thea, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, Phoebe, and Tethys. Each possessed powers related to fundamental aspects of the world, each destined to play crucial roles in the shaping of all things. Oceanus embodied the waters that would eventually encircle the world, not merely the salty seas we know today, but all water, the fundamental element of fluidity and flow. Imagine him as a great river, eternally circling the earth, his currents strong yet gentle, his depths mysterious and teeming with potential. Ceus became the embodiment of the celestial axis around which the heavens would turn, the intellect that would bring order to the cosmos. His mind was vast, containing knowledge of the stars and their movements, understanding the patterns that would govern the heavens. Crius represented the constellation of the Ram, associated with leadership and determination. Within him lay the strength needed to forge ahead, to break new ground, to lead others into uncharted territories. Hyperion was light incarnate, the pillar of the east, from whom the sun and moon would later draw their illumination. Imagine him shining with unbearable brightness, his very presence casting away shadows, his essence the source of all that would bring visibility to the world. Iapetus embodied mortality and craftsmanship, containing within him the knowledge of making and unmaking, of creation through skill rather than divine power alone. His hands would be the first to shape matter with purpose, with design, with intention. And finally, Kronos, the youngest and most cunning of the male titans. Time was his domain, though not yet measured by the instruments we know today. He embodied the relentless forward movement of existence, the principle that all things must change, must transform, must eventually end to make way for the new. Among the female titans, Thea was splendor and glory, the source of gold and silver that would one day be prized by mortal hands. Her radiance was different from Hyperion's, not the direct light of illumination, but the gleaming beauty of reflected glory, of precious things catching and transforming light into beauty. Rhea embodied fertility and motherhood, the nurturing principle that would ensure the continuation of all things. Within her lay the capacity for care, for protection, for the sustenance of new life through its vulnerable beginnings. Themis was order and divine law, the principle that would establish right relationships between all things. She understood balance, fairness, and the natural order that would maintain harmony in the cosmos. Mnemosyne was memory, the preservation of what had been so that it might inform what would be. Without her, all experiences would vanish like mist, leaving no trace to guide future actions, future generations. Phoebe embodied prophecy and oracular wisdom, the capacity to glimpse what had not yet come to pass. Through her, the future could cast its shadow backwards, allowing preparation, allowing understanding of the consequences of present actions. And Tethys, partner to Oceanus, represented the fecundity of the waters, the nurturing aspect of the great seas and rivers that would one day support countless forms of life. Imagine these 12 mighty beings, each vaster than mountains, each powerful beyond measure, each containing within themselves fundamental aspects of existence. They were the children of heaven and earth, born from the union of the two most primordial entities, inheritors of the cosmos that was still taking shape. But the union of Gaia and Ouranos produced more than just the 12 titans. Next came the Cyclopes, 3 immense beings each with a single eye centered in their forehead. These were not the savage creatures of later tales, but divine craftsmen of incredible skill. Their names were Brontes, thunder, Steripes, lightning, and Argesh, brightness. Within them lay the power to forge the weapons that would one day shake the cosmos, to harness energies beyond comprehension and shape them to specific purposes. The Cyclopes were followed by even more terrifying offspring, the Hecatonchires, or hundred-handed ones. Katos, Briareos, and Gyges each possessed 50 heads and 100 arms of immeasurable strength. They embodied violent force, the raw power of natural disasters, of earthquakes, of tsunamis, of storms that could reshape the face of the world. They were chaotic and primal, difficult to control, overwhelming in their multiplicity. As these children came forth from Gaia, a troubling pattern emerged. Ouranos, the vast sky, looked down upon some of his offspring with disgust and fear. The Titans, beautiful and ordered, he could accept. But the Cyclopes with their single eyes, the Hecatonchires with their many limbs and heads, these he considered monstrous abominations, unworthy of the light of day, threats to his own supremacy. And so, in the first cruel act of the cosmos, Ouranos took each of these monstrous children as they were born and thrust them back into Gaia's womb, forcing them down into the darkness of her body, refusing to allow them to take their place in the world. Imagine the pain of the Earth Mother, forced to contain within herself the children that should have been free, feeling them move and struggle inside her depths, unable to release them into the light of day. Gaia's body became distended, stretched beyond comfort by the growing, struggling forms of her imprisoned children. Their movements within her created the first earthquakes, their rage the first volcanic eruptions as they sought escape from their unjust confinement. The pain was unbearable, constant, growing worse with each passing eon as her children grew stronger within her depths. In her suffering, Gaia conceived a plan. She would turn to her other children, the Titans who had been allowed to remain free, and ask for their aid against their father's cruelty. She gathered them around her and spoke of their siblings' plight, of her own unending pain, of the injustice of Ouranos' actions. "My children," she said, her voice the rumble of distant thunder, the whisper of wind through ancient stone. "Your father has committed a great wrong against your brothers, against me. He fears them, fears their power, fears they might one day challenge his dominion over the heavens. And so he keeps them imprisoned within me, causing pain beyond measure, preventing them from fulfilling their rightful roles in the cosmos. This cannot continue. Will none of you stand against him? Will none of you free your siblings and end your mother's torment?" The Titans looked at one another, uncertain. Ouranos was their father, the mighty sky, the ruler of all above. To move against him would be dangerous beyond measure. One by one, they turned away, unable or unwilling to challenge such power. All except Kronos, the youngest, the most ambitious. Kronos stepped forward, his presence like the slow but inevitable advance of time itself. "Mother," he said, his voice neither loud nor forceful, but inexorable as the passing of years. "I will do this thing. I will free my siblings and end your suffering. But I will need a weapon capable of overcoming my father's power." Gaia nodded, her movement causing mountains to shift slightly on her surface. From deep within herself, from the same substance that formed her bones, she created a great adamantine sickle, a weapon of terrible sharpness, capable of cutting even the substance of the heavens themselves. This she gave to Kronos, along with her blessing and a warning. Power taken through violence often leads to more violence. Be careful, my son, that in overthrowing tyranny, you do not become a tyrant yourself. But Kronos' mind was already filled with visions of rule, of supremacy, of a cosmos with himself at its center rather than his father. He took the sickle and concealed himself, waiting for the right moment to strike. The opportunity came with nightfall, as Ouranos descended to cover Gaia in his usual embrace. The sky lowered himself onto the earth, stars gleaming across his vast form, unaware of the trap that had been laid. As he settled into union with Gaia, Kronos emerged from his hiding place, adamantine sickle raised high. With one terrible stroke, he severed his father's organs of generation, the source of his creative power. Ouranos screamed, his cry the first thunder to echo across the cosmos, his pain causing the heavens themselves to tremble. He pulled away from Gaia, withdrew into the heights, retreating from the world he had helped to bring into being. As Ouranos withdrew, drops of his divine blood fell upon Gaia, seeping into her fertile soil. From these drops would later spring the Ouranos, the Furies, the Gigantes, the Giants, and the Melii, the ash tree nymphs. Beings of vengeance, of strength, and of nurturing life, all born from violence, all carrying within them the memory of this first cosmic crime. The severed organs of Ouranos fell into the sea, where they floated upon the waters, surrounded by white foam. From this divine substance, fertilized by the essence of the sky itself, something new began to take form, but that is a tale for another time. With Ouranos retreated to the furthest reaches of the cosmos, the children he had imprisoned were finally released from Gaia's depths. The Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires emerged, blinking in the newfound freedom, their power finally unrestrained. But rather than thanking their liberator, they found themselves facing a new tyrant. Kronos, having tasted power in his victory over his father, had no intention of sharing rule with his newly freed siblings. Fearing their strength might one day challenge his own, he re-imprisoned the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires, casting them into Tartarus, the deepest and darkest pit of the cosmos, where they would be confined by walls of bronze, guarded by a fearsome dragon. Gaia watched in sorrow as history repeated itself, as one tyrant merely replaced another. Her pain had ended, but the injustice continued in a new form. She retreated into silence, into the slow movements of earth and stone, watching as her children shaped the world according to their wills, waiting for the day when true justice might finally emerge. With Ouranos defeated and the monstrous children safely imprisoned, Kronos established himself as ruler of the cosmos. He took as his queen his sister Rhea, she of the flowing fertility, she of motherhood and nurturing. Together they would produce the next generation of deities, beings who would come to be known as the Olympians. But that, too, is a tale yet to be told. For now, let us consider what had been accomplished in these early days of existence. From chaos had come the first beings. From them had come the Titans and their siblings, and through conflict and violence, a kind of order had been established. The cosmos was taking shape, moving slowly from formlessness toward form, from potential toward actuality. The reign of Kronos would come to be known as the Golden Age, a time of peace and plenty throughout the cosmos. Having secured his position through violence, the youngest Titan now ruled with relative benevolence, at least toward those who posed no threat to his power. The world began to fill with wonders as the Titans exercised their various influences. Oceanus's waters flowed around the earth, separating lands, providing paths for movement, nurturing countless forms of life within their depths. Hyperion's light illuminated all things, bringing clarity and warmth to a world that had known only undifferentiated existence. Themis established the first laws, the basic principles that would govern relationships between all things. Each Titan contributed according to their nature, their gifts shaping the world into something more complex, more beautiful, more ordered than what had come before. Yet beneath this seeming harmony lay the seeds of future conflict. Gaia had not forgotten the imprisonment of her children. The Cyclopes and Hecatonchires remained confined in Tartarus, their potential contributions to the cosmos unrealized, their treatment unjust. And Ouranos, though withdrawn from active participation in the world's affairs, had not forgotten the injury done to him by his son. Before retreating to the furthest reaches of existence, he had pronounced a prophecy. As Kronos had overthrown him, so would Kronos be overthrown by his own child. This prophecy would shape all that was to come, would drive Kronos to acts of unspeakable cruelty, would establish the pattern of generational conflict that would define divine succession for ages to come. But in these early days of his reign, the prophecy was just a distant shadow, a problem for the future, not the present. For now, the Titans ruled a world still taking shape. Their powers, vast as they were focused on establishing the basic structures of existence, on bringing forth from chaos the ordered cosmos that would support all future developments. They were not yet the personified deities of later understanding, with human-like forms and human-like concerns, but rather elemental forces, aspects of nature itself, consciousness spread throughout their domains rather than concentrated in individual bodies. Imagine Oceanus not as a humanoid god but as the waters themselves, aware and purposeful in their movements. Picture Hyperion not as a crowned king but as light itself, conscious of its own illuminating properties. Think of Themis not as a robed judge but as the principle of natural order, the tendency of all things to seek their proper relationships. These were the Titans, fundamental, elemental, vast beyond human comprehension. Under their rule, the first division of the cosmos was established. The upper realms belonged to the sky, to what remained of Ouranos' presence and influence. The middle world was the domain of Gaia, the earth and all that lived upon her surface. The waters belonged to Oceanus and Tethys, encircling all, flowing through all. And the dark depths, including Tartarus, remained mysterious and largely unexplored, a place of confinement rather than habitation. As time passed, though time itself was not yet measured as we measure it now, not yet divided into days and nights, seasons and years, Kronos and Rhea came together in union, as Ouranos and Gaia had before them. From their joining came a new generation of divine beings, different in nature from the Titans, more individualized, more personified, containing within themselves more specific aspects of existence, rather than the broad, fundamental forces embodied by their parents. The first to be born was Hestia, who would become goddess of the hearth, of the home, of the centered stillness around which domestic life revolves. As she emerged from Rhea, Kronos looked upon his daughter with suspicion and fear. Was this the child prophesied to overthrow him? Would this small goddess one day challenge his supremacy, as he had challenged his father's? Taking no chances, Kronos opened his great mouth and swallowed Hestia whole, taking her back into himself, imprisoning her within his own body. Rhea cried out in shock and grief, but could do nothing against the power of her husband and king. Hestia's light was extinguished, not destroyed, but contained, prevented from shining forth into the world she had barely glimpsed. Next came Demeter, who would become goddess of the harvest, of agriculture, of the cultivated bounty of the earth. But she, too, was swallowed by her father, condemned to imprisonment before her powers could manifest, before her influence could take hold in the developing cosmos. Then came Hera, future queen of the gods, embodiment of marriage and committed union. She met the same fate as her sisters, disappearing down her father's gullet, trapped within his divine substance. The pattern continued with the birth of Hades, who would one day rule the underworld, governing the souls of the departed with stern but fair authority. He, too, was swallowed by Kronos, his potential dominion postponed by his father's fear. And then came Poseidon, future lord of the seas, master of earthquakes, bearer of the trident. Despite his strength, already evident even in infancy, he could not resist his father's power and joined his siblings in the dark confines of the Titan's body. With each child devoured, Rhea's grief grew deeper, her resentment of her husband stronger. She had agreed to be his queen, to share in his rule of the cosmos, to bear his children and nurture the next generation of deities. Instead, she found herself continually bereaved, her offspring stolen before she could truly know them, their potential contributions to the cosmos denied. The Golden Age, it seemed, was golden only for Kronos himself, built upon the suppression of all who might challenge his absolute authority. When Rhea found herself pregnant for a sixth time, she resolved that this child, at least, would escape its father's monstrous appetite. She went to Gaia, her mother, the earth herself, seeking counsel and aid. "Mother," she said, her voice thin with despair, "I cannot bear to lose another child to Kronos' paranoia. 5 of my babies he has swallowed, 5 lights extinguished before they could truly shine. I carry a 6th now, moving within me, and I fear for its fate. Help me, mother. Help me save this one, at least. Gaia, who had suffered the imprisonment of her own children within her body, who understood all too well the pain Rhea endured, nodded slowly, the movement rippling across her mountainous form. My daughter, she said, her voice the whisper of wind through ancient forests. I will help you, but understand that in saving this child, you set in motion forces that cannot be contained, events that will shake the very foundations of the cosmos. Ouranos' prophecy hangs still in the heavens. Kronos will be overthrown by his child, as he overthrew his father. If this child survives, conflict must follow. Are you prepared for what will come? Rhea placed a hand on her swollen belly, feeling the movement of the child within. I am, she said simply. Better conflict than continued tyranny. Better change, even violent change, than eternal stagnation under Kronos' fear-driven rule. What must I do? Gaia's plan was both simple and cunning. When the time came for Rhea to give birth, she would travel to the island of Crete, far from Kronos' watchful gaze. There, in a deep cave, she would bear her child in secret. The infant, who would be named Zeus, would be left in the care of the nymphs of Crete, divine maidens who would raise him in hiding, nurturing him until he was strong enough to challenge his father. But Kronos would expect to see a child, would demand something to swallow. For this, Gaia instructed Rhea to wrap a stone in swaddling clothes, disguising it as a newborn. This stone, presented to Kronos in place of Zeus, would satisfy his paranoia without requiring the sacrifice of another divine infant. When her time came, Rhea followed her mother's plan precisely. She traveled to Crete, to the cave on Mount Ida, and there gave birth to Zeus, strongest of her children, future king of the gods, wielder of the thunderbolt. She left him in the care of the nymphs Adrastea and Ida, and of the goat Amalthea, whose milk would nourish the infant god, making him strong and vital. Then, wrapping a stone in swaddling clothes, Rhea returned to Kronos. She presented the disguised stone with downcast eyes, her manner suggesting the same defeat she had shown 5 times before. Kronos, suspicious but satisfied, took what he believed to be his son and swallowed it whole, feeling it settle heavily in his divine stomach, unaware that he had been deceived. On Crete, Zeus grew quickly, nurtured by milk sweeter and more potent than any ordinary sustenance, protected by the vigilant nymphs who had pledged themselves to his service. The cave where he was raised was wonderful beyond description. Honeybees made their home there, producing golden sweetness to supplement his diet. The air was filled with the scent of flowers that bloomed year-round in the divine presence. And to cover the sounds of the infant god's cries, which might have carried on the wind to unfriendly ears, the Curides, minor deities native to the island, would perform wild dances around the cave, clashing their spears against their shields to create a din that concealed Zeus's presence. As Zeus grew from infancy to childhood, from childhood to youth, from youth to the full power of godhood, he learned of his heritage, of his father's cruelty, of his siblings imprisoned within the Titan's vast form. He learned of Ouranos' prophecy and came to understand that he was its fulfillment, the son destined to overthrow his father, as his father had overthrown his grandfather. He learned of his mother's deception, of the stone that had taken his place in Kronos' stomach, of the trust placed in him by both Rhea and Gaia to free the cosmos from tyranny once again. When he had reached the fullness of his power, Zeus left Crete and approached Kronos' court in disguise. He presented himself as a cupbearer, winning a position in the Titan's retinue through his youth and beauty. In this role, he was able to observe his father closely, to understand his strengths and weaknesses, to plan his eventual overthrow. Working with Métis, a Titaness whose name means cunning intelligence, Zeus prepared a special draft, a mixture of honey and mustard, sweet to the initial taste but powerful enough to cause violent illness. This he served to Kronos, who drank it down without suspicion, not recognizing his own son in the beautiful youth who attended him. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Kronos doubled over in pain, his divine form shaken by spasms more powerful than any earthquake. And then, in reverse order of their swallowing, he began to vomit up the contents of his stomach. First the stone disguised as Zeus, then Poseidon, then Hades, then Hera, then Demeter, and finally Hestia. Each emerged whole and unharmed, having been contained but not destroyed within their father's divine substance. Each had continued to grow, to develop, to become what they were meant to be, even in that dark confinement. The siblings looked at one another in wonder, then at Zeus who had freed them, then at Kronos who had imprisoned them. Their father was weakened by the violent expulsion, diminished temporarily by the loss of what he had contained. This was the moment to strike, to fulfill the prophecy, to shift the balance of cosmic power once again. But Kronos was not without allies. The other titans, with few exceptions, rallied to his cause. They had prospered under his rule, had exercised their powers without interference, had built a cosmos according to their vision. They would not surrender their positions easily, would not allow the upstart children of Kronos and Rhea to claim dominion over what they had established. And so began the Titanomachy, the great war between the Titans and what would come to be known as the Olympians, the generational conflict foretold by Ouranos, the struggle for cosmic supremacy that would reshape the world once again. It was not simply a battle between individual deities, but a clash between different principles of existence, different visions of what the cosmos should be. The Titans represented the elemental, the vast, the impersonal forces of nature. The Olympians embodied more personified aspects, more individualized powers, a cosmos organized according to specific domains rather than general influences. The war lasted 10 years, not mere earthly years as we count them now, but divine years, vast periods of time during which stars were born and died, mountains rose and fell, oceans advanced and retreated. The combatants were evenly matched in many ways. The experience and established power of the Titans balanced against the fresh vitality and specialized abilities of the Olympians. Zeus, realizing that victory would require more than the forces currently at his disposal, remembered the imprisoned children of Ouranos, the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, still confined in Tartarus, still guarded by the fearsome dragon camp. He descended into the depths, slew the dragon, and broke the bonds that held these ancient beings captive. In gratitude for their liberation, the Cyclopes, divine craftsmen of incomparable skill, forged special weapons for Zeus and his brothers. For Zeus, the thunderbolt, a weapon that could call down the fires of the heavens themselves. For Poseidon, the trident, a three-pronged spear capable of splitting mountains and stirring the seas to storm. For Hades, a helmet of invisibility, allowing him to move unseen among his enemies, to strike from unexpected quarters. The Hecatonchires, with their 100 hands and immeasurable strength, joined the battle directly, hurling mountains at the Titans, creating havoc among their ranks, disrupting their strategies with overwhelming force. With these new allies, the tide of the war turned in favor of the Olympians. The final battle was cosmic in scale, beyond human comprehension. The earth shook as the Hecatonchires launched volley after volley of massive boulders. The sky was split by Zeus's thunderbolts, by lightning that could pierce even divine flesh. The seas rose in great walls of water as Poseidon plunged his trident into the earth. The very foundations of the cosmos trembled as these immense powers clashed, as the old order and the new struggled for supremacy. In the end, it was the Olympians who prevailed. The majority of the Titans were defeated and bound, confined in Tartarus as they had once confined others, guarded now by the Hecatonchires who had themselves been prisoners in that dark realm. A few Titans were spared this fate, those who had supported Zeus or at least remained neutral in the conflict. Oceanus, who had kept to his waters during the war, Prometheus and Epimetheus, sons of Iapetus, who had sided with the Olympians, Métis, whose cunning had helped Zeus overthrow his father, and a few others were allowed to retain their freedom, their powers now subordinate to the new rulers of the cosmos. Kronos himself met a different fate in some tellings, not imprisoned but exiled to the islands of the blessed, where he would rule over the souls of the virtuous dead. his former tyranny transformed into benevolent governance of a limited realm. In other accounts, he was indeed imprisoned in Tartarus with the majority of his kin, his power broken, his reign ended. With victory secured, the cosmos was divided among the children of Cronos and Rhea. Zeus took the sky and overall leadership, becoming king of gods and men, ruler of Mount Olympus, wielder of the thunderbolt. Poseidon claimed the seas, the vast waters that covered much of the earth, home to countless creatures and source of both bounty and destruction. Hades was given dominion over the underworld, the realm of the dead, governing the souls of those who had completed their earthly existence. The earth itself and Mount Olympus, the divine home raised high above the world of mortals, were to be shared by all the gods, common ground where they could meet and mingle. The sisters, Hestia, Demeter, and Hera, also took their places in the new order. Hestia became goddess of the hearth, of the home, of the centered stillness that makes dwelling possible. Demeter claimed dominion over agriculture, over the cultivated bounty of the earth, over the cycle of growth and harvest that would sustain mortal life. Hera, joining with Zeus in divine marriage, became queen of the gods, protector of matrimony, guardian of committed unions. This new pantheon, these Olympians, would go on to shape the world in more specific ways than their Titan predecessors. They would interact more directly with mortals once humanity emerged, would embody aspects of existence more relatable to human experience, would establish cults and receive worship in forms recognizable to later generations. But their rule, like the rule of the Titans before them, was built upon conflict, upon the overthrow of the previous generation, upon violence justified by the need to end tyranny. The pattern established in these early days of cosmic history, creation, rule, overthrow, new creation, would echo through all that followed. It would shape the understanding of divine succession, would influence mortal politics and religion, would become the foundation for countless stories and myths that would seek to explain the nature of existence itself. But before we delve into these later developments, let us return to an earlier moment in our tale, to something briefly mentioned but not yet fully explored. When Cronos used the adamantine sickle to castrate his father Ouranos, the severed divine organs fell into the sea, where they floated upon the waters surrounded by white foam. From this divine substance, something new began to take form. The sea foam gathered and condensed, swirling in patterns of increasing complexity, glowing with inner light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Gradually, a shape emerged, the form of a woman of such beauty that no words, divine or mortal, could adequately describe her. This was Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, born not from the union of divine parents but from the violent separation of heaven and earth, from the creative power of Ouranos made independent of his being. Aphrodite rose from the waters off the coast of Cyprus, stepping onto the shore as if returning to a home she had always known. Where her feet touched the sand, flowers bloomed. Not the simple blossoms known to later mortals, but perfect expressions of color and form, of fragrance and delicacy. She was attended by Eros and Himeros, by desire and longing, forces that had existed since the beginning, but now found their perfect expression in her presence. Though born from violence, Aphrodite embodied a different kind of power, not the force that subjugates, but the attraction that unites. Not the strength that breaks, but the beauty that binds. In her was the potential for a different kind of cosmic order, one based not on dominance but on harmony, not on control but on unity freely chosen. When she ascended to Olympus to take her place among the gods, even Zeus looked upon her with awe. Here was a power he could not claim to have created or conquered, a force that existed before his birth, independent of his authority. In her presence, conflicts quieted, disputes faded, cooperation replaced competition, at least temporarily. Her power was subtle but profound, working not through commands but through inspiration, not through fear but through desire. Yet the harmony Aphrodite embodied was always in tension with the hierarchical order established by Zeus. Love and beauty could influence even the king of the gods, could momentarily overcome his authority, but could not permanently replace the cosmic structure built upon victory in conflict. The pattern established by Ouranos, Kronos, and Zeus would remain the foundation of divine governance, with Aphrodite's alternative vision operating within its constraints rather than transforming it completely. As the Olympians settled into their roles as rulers of the cosmos, attention turned to the world itself, to the establishing of order in what had previously been under the less differentiated control of the Titans. The sky, the sea, the underworld, and the shared earth needed to be populated, needed to be filled with beings who would enact the divine will in more specific ways than the gods themselves could do. And so began the creation of the lesser divinities, the spirits of place and function, the personified aspects of natural forces and human concerns. Poseidon gathered around himself the sea deities, Triton, his trumpeter, whose conch shell could calm or rouse the waters, Nereus, the old man of the sea, whose knowledge of the deep was unmatched, the Nereids, 50 sea nymphs of extraordinary beauty and power, daughters of Nereus who controlled specific aspects of ocean life, and countless others who would become the divine servants of the sea god's realm. Hades was joined in the underworld by figures who would help govern that shadowy realm: Thanatos, the gentle personification of death; Hypnos, god of sleep, twin brother to Thanatos and sharing a similar peaceful aspect; the Keres, spirits of violent death who contrasted with Thanatos's gentleness; Charon, the ferryman who would transport souls across the rivers of the underworld; and the judges of the dead, tasked with determining the appropriate afterlife for each soul based on their earthly actions. On the earth and in the sky, similar divine hierarchies were established. Mountain gods, river goddesses, spirits of forest and field took their places. The winds were personified and given specific duties: Boreas the north wind, Notus the south wind, Eurus the east wind, and Zephyrus the west wind, each with their own character, their own proper season, their own effects upon the world. The hours, the seasons, the phases of the moon, all received their divine representatives, their personifications, their places in the cosmic order. For a time, this divine bureaucracy functioned smoothly, each deity attending to their assigned duties, contributing to the overall harmony of the cosmos. But there was a notable absence in this world of gods and spirits. There were no mortal beings, no creatures who would live and die in the ordinary sense, no conscious entities who would look upon the gods with wonder and worship, who would strive to understand the divine order and find their place within it. Different tales tell of the creation of humanity, of how mortal beings came to exist in a world previously populated only by immortals. Some say Prometheus, the Foresight Titan who had sided with Zeus in the Great War, shaped humans from clay and water, creating forms similar to the gods but limited in power and duration. Others tell that Zeus himself ordered the creation of mortals, delegating the task to Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus. Still others suggest that humans emerged from the earth itself, born from the blood of the Titans that had soaked into Gaia during the Great War. Regardless of their origins, these first humans were simple creatures, lacking knowledge, lacking skills, lacking the means to survive in the complex world they inhabited. They huddled in caves, ate raw foods, died from exposure and predation, failed to build the ordered societies that would later become their hallmark. They were, in the words of one ancient teller of tales, like ants dwelling in sunless caves, with no mark to tell winter from summer, from flowering spring or fruit-bearing autumn. Prometheus, whose name means forethought, looked upon these struggling creatures with compassion. Unlike many of the gods, who viewed mortals as either amusing playthings or potential worshippers, Prometheus saw their potential, their capacity for growth, their ability to become something more than their original limitations might suggest. He resolved to help them, to give them the tools they would need to thrive in the world dominated by divine powers. First, he gave them knowledge, practical skills like building, cooking, medicine, mathematics, writing, and agriculture. He taught them to observe the stars, to predict the seasons, to understand the cycle of the year. He showed them how to domesticate animals, to use creatures stronger than themselves as aids rather than threats. He revealed the properties of plants, which could heal and which could harm, which could nourish and which could destroy. But the greatest gift Prometheus sought to give humanity was fire. Not the natural fire of lightning strikes and forest blazes, which was destructive and temporary, but controlled fire, fire that could be maintained and used for human purposes, fire that would transform human existence from mere survival to true civilization. The trouble was that fire, in the world order established by Zeus, was a divine prerogative, not meant for mortal use. The king of the gods had specifically forbidden sharing this power with humans, intending to keep them dependent on divine favor for warmth and light, for cooked food and forged tools, for all the benefits that controlled fire would bring. Prometheus, believing this restriction unjust, devised a plan to steal fire from the gods. He approached Mount Olympus, home of the divine assembly, and took a stalk of fennel with a hollow center. Making his way to the divine hearth, the source of the undying flame that illuminated the halls of the gods, he captured a spark within his fennel stalk. This ember, protected from wind and rain by the plant's structure, he carried down to the world of mortals. Behold, he told the awestruck humans, holding forth the glowing reed, I bring you the power of creation and destruction, of transformation and illumination. Used wisely, it will elevate you above all other mortal creatures, will make your lives longer and more comfortable, will allow you to reshape the world according to your needs. Used carelessly, it will consume you, will destroy what you have built, will remind you of your mortality and your limitations. Take it, learn from it, respect it, and remember the divine source from which it comes. The humans took the fire with wonder and gratitude, and immediately their lives began to change. They moved from caves to built shelters, warmed now by hearth fires that drove away the cold and darkness. They cooked their food, making it more digestible, more nutritious, more varied in flavor and texture. They fired clay into pottery, making vessels that could store food and water, that could be used for cooking and carrying, that could be decorated with images and patterns reflecting their understanding of the world. They melted metals, creating tools and weapons more effective than the stone implements they had used before, allowing them to hunt more successfully, to cultivate the land more efficiently, to defend themselves against predators both animal and human. With these advances came a shift in the relationship between humans and gods. No longer entirely dependent on divine favor for survival, humans developed a degree of autonomy, of self-sufficiency, of pride in their own accomplishments. They still acknowledged the gods, still offered worship and sacrifice, but they did so now as beings with their own dignity, their own achievements, their own place in the cosmic order. Zeus, observing these changes from his throne on Olympus, was furious. Not only had Prometheus disobeyed a direct command, but he had fundamentally altered the balance of power in the cosmos, had given mortals a degree of independence that threatened the absolute authority of the divine. The king of the gods resolved to punish both the giver and the recipients of fire, to ensure that such insubordination would not go unmarked, to establish definitively the proper hierarchy of the cosmos. For Prometheus, the punishment was terrible indeed. Zeus ordered the rebellious Titan chained to a cliff face in the Caucasus Mountains, exposed to the elements, unable to move or seek relief. Each day, an eagle, some say the very eagle that served as Zeus's personal messenger, would descend and tear out Prometheus's liver, feasting on the organ as the bound Titan watched in agony. Each night, Prometheus's divine nature would restore the liver, making him whole again, only for the eagle to return the next day, repeating the torment in an endless cycle of suffering. Yet even in his torture, Prometheus remained defiant. He had known the cost of his actions, had willingly accepted the pain in exchange for the benefits his gift would bring to humanity. And he possessed a secret knowledge of a future threat to Zeus's rule, a potential marriage that would produce a son stronger than his father, capable of overthrowing the current cosmic order just as Zeus had overthrown Kronos, just as Kronos had overthrown Ouranos. This knowledge he kept to himself, his only bargaining chip in the unequal contest with the king of the gods. For humans, Zeus devised a more subtle punishment, one that would balance the benefit of fire with a corresponding difficulty, one that would remind mortals of their proper place while allowing them to keep the divine spark that had been illicitly shared with them. He commanded Hephaestus, god of the forge, to create a being of unprecedented beauty, a woman who would appear as a blessing but bring with her consequences unforeseen by those who would receive her. Hephaestus, whose skill at the forge was unmatched among the gods, crafted a figure from earth and water, shaped it into the form of a lovely maiden, gave it the semblance of life and movement. Athena, goddess of wisdom and crafts, taught the figure to weave and to adorn herself with graceful garments. Aphrodite bestowed upon her irresistible charm and the ability to kindle desire in all who beheld her. Hermes, messenger of the gods, gave her speech and a mind quick to learn, along with a nature that combined curiosity with a touch of mischief. Each of the gods contributed something to this new creation, making her not merely beautiful but fascinating, not simply alluring but compelling. They called her Pandora, which means all gifts, for she was indeed the recipient of talents and traits from all the divine powers. But among these gifts was one that would prove problematic, an insatiable curiosity, a desire to know what was hidden, to understand what was concealed, to experience what was forbidden. Zeus presented Pandora with a large jar, often mistranslated as a box in later tellings, sealed tightly and decorated with warnings not to open it. "This contains additional gifts," he told her, his voice heavy with false concern. "Things meant for humanity but not yet ready to be revealed. Guard it carefully, keep it sealed, ensure that its contents remain safely contained." With Pandora properly equipped for her role in the divine plan, Zeus sent her to the world of mortals as a gift to Epimetheus, brother of Prometheus. Unlike his foresight brother, Epimetheus was characterized by afterthought rather than forethought. He understood events only after they had occurred, learned from consequences rather than anticipating them. Prometheus had warned him never to accept gifts from Zeus, knowing the king of the gods would seek revenge for the theft of fire. But when Epimetheus saw Pandora, all caution fled his mind. Her beauty, her charm, her divine allure overcame his better judgment, and he welcomed her into his home, into his life, into his heart. For a time, they lived together in harmony. Pandora adapted quickly to the mortal world, learning its ways, enjoying its pleasures, finding contentment in the simple life she shared with Epimetheus. But always in the corner of their dwelling stood the jar, sealed and mysterious, its warnings both deterrent and enticement to her divinely crafted curiosity. Eventually, as Zeus had intended, Pandora's desire to know overcame her caution. She approached the jar, examined its intricate decorations, tested the weight of its sealed lid. Surely, she thought, a brief look inside would cause no harm. Surely I can close it again before anything escapes. Surely my curiosity, this divine gift, would not lead me to actions truly destructive. With these rationalizations, she lifted the lid, just slightly, just enough to peer inside, just enough to satisfy her overwhelming need to know. With these rationalizations, she lifted the lid, just slightly, just enough to peer inside, just enough to satisfy her overwhelming need to know. But the jar did not contain gifts, at least not in the ordinary sense. It contained all the difficulties that Zeus had previously kept from humanity: disease and despair, hardship and hatred, conflict and confusion, old age and agonizing death. These flew out from the jar like a swarm of pestilential insects, filling the air, spreading throughout the world, attaching themselves to every human being, becoming part of the mortal condition from that moment forward. Horrified by what she had unleashed, Pandora quickly closed the jar. But it was too late. The evils had escaped and could not be recaptured. Only one thing remained in the bottom of the jar, the spirit called Elpis, usually translated as hope. Whether this was yet another evil, more insidious than the rest because it kept humans striving despite the inevitable disappointments of life, or whether it was a genuine blessing, a means of enduring the now inescapable hardships of mortal existence, remains one of the great ambiguities of the tale. Thus Zeus's plan was fulfilled. Humans retained the fire stolen by Prometheus, but their lives were now filled with difficulties that balanced its benefits, with hardships that reminded them of their mortal limitations, with sufferings that encouraged continued reliance on divine assistance. The cosmic hierarchy was restored, though altered from its original form. The proper order of authority, gods over humans, Zeus over gods, was reaffirmed, though not in the absolute manner that had existed before Prometheus's intervention. The Titan himself remained bound to his cliff, his torment continuing day after day, his defiance unbroken despite the agony. For thousands of years, by human reckoning, he endured this punishment, becoming a symbol of resistance to tyranny, of the price paid for progress, of the complex relationship between suffering and enlightenment. Eventually, a resolution was found. The centaur Chiron, immortal but suffering from an incurable wound, wished to die but could not. Heracles, son of Zeus and a mortal woman, sought to free Prometheus as one of his legendary labors. Zeus, still angry but willing to allow a face-saving compromise, agreed that Prometheus could be freed if an immortal voluntarily took his place in the realm of the dead. Chiron, seeing an opportunity to end his endless pain, agreed to surrender his immortality. Heracles, with his father's reluctant consent, traveled to the Caucasus, slew the eagle that tormented Prometheus, and broke the chains that bound him. The Titan was free at last, though required to wear a ring made from his chains as a reminder of his past punishment and continuing subordination to Zeus. This reconciliation between Zeus and Prometheus symbolized a new understanding between gods and humans. Mortals would continue to use fire and all the benefits it brought, would continue to develop their skills and knowledge, would continue to assert a degree of autonomy within the cosmic order. But they would do so with proper acknowledgement of divine authority, with recognition of their own limitations, with acceptance of the hardships that balanced their achievements. The relationship between divine and mortal would never be simple or easy, would always involve tension between dependence and independence, between worship and self-assertion, between acceptance of cosmic order and desire for greater freedom. But from this tension would emerge the creative force that drove human civilization forward, the striving for connection with the divine matched by the impulse to establish human meaning and purpose, the acknowledgement of limitations balanced by the refusal to accept them as absolute, the recognition of suffering as intrinsic to mortal existence coupled with the determination to reduce it where possible. In the ages that followed the theft of fire and the opening of Pandora's jar, humans would develop increasingly complex societies, more sophisticated technologies, deeper philosophical understandings of their place in the cosmos. They would build cities and temples, create art and literature, explore the natural world and the human mind. They would worship the gods in organized cults, with established rituals and dedicated priesthoods, with festivals and sacrifices designed to maintain the proper relationship between mortal and divine. But always, at the foundation of this development, lay the primal stories of cosmic origins, the emergence from chaos, the succession of divine generations, the conflicts that established the current order of the universe. These tales provided the framework within which human existence could be understood, the context that gave meaning to mortal striving and suffering, the assurance that even the gods themselves had known conflict and pain, had experienced change and growth, had moved from simplicity to complexity just as humans were doing. For as the cosmos itself had developed from the undifferentiated void of chaos to the structured hierarchy of the Olympian order, so too did humanity develop from primitive beginnings to civilized achievement. The divine and the mortal mirrored each other, each reflecting aspects of the other, each providing models for the other's understanding. The gods were not merely more powerful humans, nor were humans simply lesser gods, but the two realms existed in relationship, in conversation, in mutual influence despite their differing natures. This understanding of cosmic origins, of divine generations, of the complex interplay between order and chaos, between authority and rebellion, between suffering and enlightenment, would shape Greek thought for centuries to come. It would influence philosophy and politics, art and architecture, personal ethics and social structures. It would provide the foundation for later developments in Western civilization, would be transformed but not replaced by subsequent religious and intellectual movements, would remain a powerful source of insight into the human condition even after literal belief in the Olympian pantheon had faded. For in these ancient tales lay truths beyond the merely factual, insights into the nature of power and its limits, into the relationship between generations, into the cost of progress, into the interplay of justice and mercy, into the fundamental questions of existence that all thinking humans must address. These were not mere stories, not simple explanations for natural phenomena, but profound explorations of what it means to be conscious in a world not made for human convenience, of how to find meaning in a cosmos characterized by both pattern and disruption, of how to relate to powers greater than oneself without surrendering one's essential dignity. For in these ancient tales lay truths beyond the merely factual, insights into the nature of power and its limits, into the relationship between generations, into the cost of progress, into the interplay of justice and mercy, into the fundamental questions of existence that all thinking humans must address. These were not mere stories, not simple explanations for natural phenomena, but profound explorations of what it means to be conscious in a world not made for human convenience, of how to find meaning in a cosmos characterized by both pattern and disruption, of how to relate to powers greater than oneself without surrendering one's essential dignity. And so we arrive at a moment of pause in our narrative, a point from which we could proceed in many directions. We could follow the Olympian gods through their complex interactions with each other and with mortals, could explore the heroic age when divine and human bloodlines mingled, could examine the development of distinct cults and their influence on Greek society, could trace the philosophical transformations of these mythic concepts in the hands of thinkers like Plato and Aristotle. But such explorations would take us far from our initial focus on cosmic origins, on the primordial beings who first brought order to the void, on the generational succession that established the world as the Greeks understood it. Perhaps it is best to conclude with a reminder of the most fundamental aspects of this cosmic vision, that from chaos came the elemental forces that would shape all existence, that from these forces emerged distinct generations of divine beings, each with their own nature and purpose, that conflict and change are intrinsic to the cosmos, not aberrations to be eliminated but essential aspects of its continuing development, and that the relationship between gods and mortals, while hierarchical, involves mutual influence and interdependence rather than simple domination and submission. In reflecting on these ancient tales, we might find not just historical or anthropological interest, but insights relevant to our own understanding of existence. For the questions they address, the nature of order and chaos, the relationship between power and justice, the role of suffering in growth, the tension between tradition and innovation, are not merely ancient concerns but perennial human preoccupations. The forms change, the specific answers evolve, but the fundamental inquiries remain, connecting us across millennia to those who first looked at the world with wonder and sought to comprehend its mysteries through narratives of divine origin and cosmic development. As we close our exploration of these primal myths, let us carry forward not just knowledge of ancient belief systems, but appreciation for the depth of thought they represent, for the poetic power of their expression, for their capacity to illuminate aspects of existence that more literal discourse might miss. For in the end, myths are not alternatives to understanding but modalities of it, not primitive science but sophisticated attempts to integrate objective knowledge with subjective meaning, to unite explanation with value, to place human experience within a framework large enough to accommodate both its terror and its wonder. The primordial deities of Greek mythology, Chaos, Gaia, Ouranos, the Titans, and their successors, represent an attempt to comprehend the foundations of existence itself, to trace the development of the cosmos from its simplest to its most complex forms, to understand the forces that shape both the natural world and human society. In their stories, we find not childish fancy but profound intuition, not primitive ignorance but sophisticated insight, not mere entertainment but essential wisdom about the nature of being and becoming in a universe characterized by both pattern and disruption, by both continuity and change. Perhaps this is why these ancient tales continue to resonate, why they remain part of our cultural heritage despite the millennia that separate us from their origins. They speak to something fundamental in the human experience, to our need to make sense of existence, to place ourselves within a larger context, to find meaning in a world that often seems indifferent to our concerns. They remind us that we are not the first to ask basic questions about the nature of reality, not the first to seek understanding of our place in the cosmos, not the first to wonder about the relationship between the visible and the invisible, between the temporal and the eternal, between the human and the divine. And in that reminder lies a kind of comfort. Not the comfort of simple answers or absolute certainty, but the reassurance that the journey of understanding is a shared human enterprise, stretching across generations and cultures, connecting us to those who came before and those who will come after, uniting us in the fundamental task of making meaning in a universe that does not yield its secrets easily but rewards persistent inquiry with glimpses of profound truth. As we contemplate the origins of the cosmos according to Greek mythology, we might reflect on our own place within the continuing story of existence, on our role in the ongoing process of bringing order from chaos, of finding meaning in mystery, of establishing harmony in the midst of conflict. For though the specific forms of divine power envisioned by the ancient Greeks may seem distant from contemporary understanding, the fundamental questions they sought to address remain central to human existence. Questions about our origins and our destiny, about power and justice, about suffering and growth, about the relationship between the individual and the forces that shape the world. In engaging with these ancient myths, we participate in a conversation that has continued for millennia, a dialogue between past and present, between different cultural understandings, between literal and symbolic modes of comprehension. We need not believe in the Olympian pantheon to appreciate the insights embedded in stories of cosmic origin and divine succession, need not accept the historical accuracy of tales like Prometheus's theft of fire to recognize the profound truth they convey about the human condition and our relationship to knowledge and power. The primordial deities of Greek mythology, Chaos, Gaia, Ouranos, the Titans, and the Olympians who succeeded them, offer us a vision of the cosmos as both ordered and dynamic, as governed by pattern yet subject to change, as hierarchical yet open to challenge and transformation. This vision, complex and sometimes contradictory, reflects the reality of human experience more accurately than simpler models that emphasize either absolute order or complete flux, either perfect harmony or unending conflict. Perhaps this is the greatest gift these ancient tales offer to contemporary awareness. A reminder that reality is multifaceted, that existence contains both structure and spontaneity, both continuity and innovation, both beauty and terror. The Greeks did not create a mythology of simple moral lessons or straightforward explanations, but a sophisticated attempt to capture the complexity of being, to acknowledge the mysteries that underlie even our most confident assertions, to express through narrative what might be inexpressible through more literal discourse. In our own quest for understanding, we might draw inspiration from their example, not mimicking their specific beliefs but emulating their willingness to engage with the fundamental questions of existence, their capacity to hold together apparent opposites in creative tension, their ability to find meaning in a cosmos not designed for human convenience. For in this approach lies not only intellectual satisfaction but existential wisdom, not merely theoretical knowledge but practical guidance for living in a world that remains, despite all our advances, as mysterious and challenging as it was to those who first looked up at the starry heavens and wondered about their origins. As we close our exploration of primordial deities and cosmic beginnings, let us carry forward this sense of wonder, this openness to mystery, this appreciation for the power of narrative to convey truths beyond the merely factual. For in doing so, we honor not only the ancient Greeks who crafted these enduring tales, but the human capacity for meaning-making that connects us across time and culture, that unites us in the shared project of understanding our place in the vast, complex, ever-evolving cosmos. In the endless cycle of day and night, of seasons passing and returning, of generations arising and fading, we find echoes of these primal myths, reminders that we too are part of the cosmic story, participants in the ongoing process of bringing order from chaos, of finding meaning in mystery, of establishing our own relationship to the powers, seen and unseen, that shape our world and our lives. And in that participation lies not only our connection to the past but our responsibility to the future, to preserve and transmit, in forms appropriate to our time, the wisdom embedded in these ancient tales, the insights that continue to illuminate the human condition despite the millennia that separate us from their origins. The story of the primordial deities is, in the end, our story as well, not in its specific details but in its fundamental themes, in its wrestling with questions of power and justice, order and chaos, continuity and change. By engaging with these ancient narratives, we place ourselves within a tradition of inquiry that stretches back to the beginnings of Western civilization, that has shaped our understanding of existence in ways both conscious and unconscious, that continues to influence how we interpret our experience and our place in the cosmos. So let us part from these tales with gratitude for their preservation and transmission, with appreciation for their enduring power to move and instruct, with recognition of their continuing relevance to our own quest for understanding. And let us remember that just as the Greeks envisioned a cosmos arising from chaos through successive generations of divine beings, each building upon and transforming what came before, so too does human understanding evolve. Not in a simple linear progression from ignorance to knowledge, but in a complex interplay of insight and blindness, of preservation and innovation, of remembering and forgetting. In this ongoing process of comprehension, ancient myths like those we have explored continue to play a vital role, not as alternatives to scientific understanding or philosophical analysis, but as complementary modes of engagement with the mysteries of existence, as ways of addressing questions that empirical investigation alone cannot resolve, as means of connecting objective knowledge with subjective meaning, of integrating explanation with value, of placing human experience within a framework large enough to accommodate both its terror and its wonder. As the stars continue their ancient courses across the night sky, as the earth continues its cycles of growth and decay, as human societies continue to evolve and transform, the tales of primordial deities and cosmic origins remain a resource for meaning-making, a source of insight into the fundamental patterns of existence, a reminder of the enduring human capacity to find significance in a universe not designed for our convenience but nonetheless hospitable to our quest for understanding. In the silence that follows the telling of these ancient stories, we might hear echoes of our own questions, our own struggles, our own attempts to comprehend the mysteries of being and becoming. And in that recognition lies the possibility of genuine dialogue across time and culture, of learning from those who have gone before without being bound by their limitations, of building upon their insights while acknowledging the partiality of all human understanding, including our own. The primordial deities of Greek mythology, Chaos, Gaia, Ouranos, the Titans, and the Olympians, offer us not final answers but fruitful questions, not settled conclusions but ongoing inquiries, not absolute truths but perspectives that continue to illuminate aspects of existence that might otherwise remain obscure. In engaging with their stories, we participate in a conversation that has continued for millennia, a dialogue between past and present, between different cultural understandings, between literal and symbolic modes of comprehension. And in that participation, we affirm our own place in the cosmic story, our own role in the ongoing process of making meaning in a universe that does not yield its secrets easily, but rewards persistent inquiry with glimpses of profound truth. For though the specific forms of divine power envisioned by the ancient Greeks may seem distant from contemporary understanding, the fundamental questions they sought to address remain central to human existence. Questions about our origins and our destiny, about power and justice, about suffering and growth, about the relationship between the individual and the forces that shape the world. In this sense, the journey we have undertaken through these ancient tales is not merely a historical expedition but an existential exploration, not simply an anthropological study but a philosophical inquiry, not just an aesthetic appreciation but a spiritual encounter. For in reflecting on these stories of cosmic origin and divine succession, we inevitably reflect on our own place within the continuing drama of existence, on our own relationship to the powers, seen and unseen, that shape our world and our lives. The primordial deities of Greek mythology offer us a vision of the cosmos as both ordered and dynamic, as governed by pattern yet subject to change, as hierarchical yet open to challenge and transformation. This vision, complex and sometimes contradictory, reflects the reality of human experience more accurately than simpler models that emphasize either absolute order or complete flux, either perfect harmony or unending conflict. In its multifaceted nature, it reminds us that reality itself is more complex than our categories, more mysterious than our explanations, more resistant to final interpretation than our desire for certainty might prefer. Perhaps this is the greatest gift these ancient tales offer to contemporary awareness, a reminder that reality is not reducible to our conceptions of it, that existence contains both structure and spontaneity, both continuity and innovation, both beauty and terror. The Greeks did not create a mythology of simple moral lessons or straightforward explanations, but a sophisticated attempt to capture the complexity of being, to acknowledge the mysteries that underlie even our most confident assertions, to express through narrative what might be inexpressible through more literal discourse. In our own quest for understanding, we might draw inspiration from their example, not mimicking their specific beliefs but emulating their willingness to engage with the fundamental questions of existence, their capacity to hold together apparent opposites in creative tension, their ability to find meaning in a cosmos not designed for human convenience. For in this approach lies not only intellectual satisfaction but existential wisdom, not merely theoretical knowledge but practical guidance for living in a world that remains, despite all our advances, as mysterious and challenging as it was to those who first looked up at the starry heavens and wondered about their origins. As we close our exploration of primordial deities and cosmic beginnings, let us carry forward this sense of wonder, this openness to mystery, this appreciation for the power of narrative to convey truths beyond the merely factual. For in doing so, we honor not only the ancient Greeks who crafted these enduring tales, but the human capacity for meaning-making that connects us across time and culture, that unites us in the shared project of understanding our place in the vast, complex, ever-evolving cosmos. In the endless cycle of day and night, of seasons passing and returning, of generations arising and fading, we find echoes of these primal myths, reminders that we too are part of the cosmic story, participants in the ongoing process of bringing order from chaos, of finding meaning in mystery, of establishing our own relationship to the powers, seen and unseen, that shape our world and our lives. And in that participation lies not only our connection to the past but our responsibility to the future, to preserve and transmit, in forms appropriate to our time, the wisdom embedded in these ancient tales, the insights that continue to illuminate the human condition despite the millennia that separate us from their origins. The story of the primordial deities is, in the end, our story as well, not in its specific details but in its fundamental themes, in its wrestling with questions of power and justice, order and chaos, continuity and change. By engaging with these ancient narratives, we place ourselves within a tradition of inquiry that stretches back to the beginnings of Western civilization, that has shaped our understanding of existence in ways both conscious and unconscious, that continues to influence how we interpret our experience and our place in the cosmos. So let us part from these tales with gratitude for their preservation and transmission, with appreciation for their enduring power to move and instruct, with recognition of their continuing relevance to our own quest for understanding. And let us remember that just as the Greeks envisioned a cosmos arising from chaos through successive generations of divine beings, each building upon and transforming what came before, so too does human understanding evolve. Not in a simple linear progression from ignorance to knowledge, but in a complex interplay of insight and blindness, of preservation and innovation, of remembering and forgetting. In this ongoing process of comprehension, ancient myths like those we have explored continue to play a vital role, not as alternatives to scientific understanding or philosophical analysis, but as complementary modes of engagement with the mysteries of existence, as ways of addressing questions that empirical investigation alone cannot resolve, as means of connecting objective knowledge with subjective meaning, of integrating explanation with value, of placing human experience within a framework large enough to accommodate both its terror and its wonder. As the stars continue their ancient courses across the night sky, as the Earth continues its cycles of growth and decay. As human societies continue to evolve and transform, the tales of primordial deities and cosmic origins remain a resource for meaning-making, a source of insight into the fundamental patterns of existence, a reminder of the enduring human capacity to find significance in a universe not designed for our convenience but nonetheless hospitable to our quest for understanding.